Who sometimes like to look in on this afterwards. So I hope that doesn't dampen our conversation, but I am recording our conversation this morning that I have described this as a conversational kind of Bible study, which means I hope that I'm not the only one talking on this. I did just kind of want to let you know what's living in my head with this whole series. This series came about, boy, we're getting a good crowd today.
I'm glad I waited till after we got through the shoes.
Yeah, indeed. A year and a half, maybe close to 2 years ago, we were invited to submit this big dreaming grant with the annual conference. And part of that dreaming for me is, I've been in all sorts of churches and places that have these impressive stained glass windows that have characters from the Bible or from church history or whatever, but these windows that tell these stories that are kind of the background of who those congregations are. And while we're not going to be replacing the windows in our worship space, I noticed that we've got these big white patches that could receive panels of artwork. And so my initial dream was, and still is, to start a conversation with artists in our community about what kind of images could we put up in that space that help remind us who we are, but also help inform anybody who comes into our space about who we want to be. That process, this is a part of that process as we begin to narrow down, what are the really essential stories? That's the heart of the series. The process itself will go a step beyond that as we begin to invite the artists to envision, well, how do you bring those stories to life? And then we'll get a group together of us to look at their proposals and to, so that we can say, well, that one really hits the spot, or, well, let's talk about this one a little more, so that we're still in control of what's going to go up there, that we're not just saying, what artwork do you want to put up in our church, and then we'll have, a vivid illustration of the Song of Solomon. That's not going to happen. Unless we choose it to. So, in this series so far, this is actually the third week of this series, even though last week was a little different because of the weather. We started with the first story, which was the first story in the Bible, which is the first creation story in Genesis 1. That is the version where God makes creation in 6 days and rests on the seventh day. And part of that story is the one where God creates humanity. And that humanity is made not as a singularity, but in the traditional language, God creates humanity as male and female. But the implication of that is that humanity has many expressions. But the important part of that is that while at the end of each day of creation, God says, well, this is good. At the end of this day when humanity is created, God says, this is good. This is very good. And, that I think that's an important story for us because I don't know about your all background. You can let me know if I'm off base on this. But I've more often heard churches telling us how bad we are and how in need of changing, of forgiveness we are. I've heard that far more often than hearing the church says, we all start from the best place, from the place where God thinks we are very good. Is that your experience?
Mm-hmm.
And then last week, while we were snowed in, we talked about the story of the loaves and fishes. Actually, I ran that audio of the folk singer John McCutcheon telling his version of that story, which I have loved for many years. And his gist of it is that the miracle in that story is that somebody raised this little child who offered 5 loaves and a couple of fish. Somebody raised that child to believe that what little they had could make a difference. What little they had was worth sharing. And I invited us to do a little practice with that story of putting yourself in the story, of hearing the different roles. There are the disciples who are kind of at a loss. Jesus wants the crowd fed, but they don't have money to cater that big of a gathering. Maybe you see yourself as one of the people in that crowd. Maybe you see yourself as that little child. If you're really daring, maybe you even see yourself as Jesus. How would Jesus react in that kind of, So today, with the story of the 2 sons, I'm going to tell you that story again, and I want you to kind of close your eyes and imagine what you see as we tell this story. Imagine yourself as a part of that story, and to discover where do you find yourself in that. So, take a deep breath, relax, close your eyes, and listen to the story that Jesus tells. There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of the 2 sons comes to his father and says, I can't wait for my inheritance. I want you to give your share of the estate to me now. And so the father divides the estate and gives the younger son his share, who goes off to a far country where he wastes the money in wild living. And while there, a severe famine came on the land, and everyone was hungry. And the younger son hires himself out to a local farmer who gives him the job of feeding the pigs. And he was so hungry that even the pods that were given to the pigs began to look good to him. And he thought to himself, back home, even the hired hands have plenty to eat. And while I have given up my claim as part of the family, I will go back to my father and ask to be hired on. And so on the trip home, he practices that speech. I have sinned against God and against you, and I am no longer fit to be called your son. But please, hire me on as a hand. I have sinned against God and against you, and I'm no longer fit to be called your son. But please, hire me on as a hand. But his father sees him while he is yet a long way off and rushes out to meet him. And when he meets his son, he wraps his arms around him and kisses him. puts a ring on his finger and calls for the best robe to wrap him up in, and then calls for the servants to prepare a celebration to kill the fattened calf and invite all the neighbors to come, because this son of mine was lost and is found. He was dead and he's alive again. And while they are partying, the older son comes in from the fields where he'd been working and hears all the commotion. And from the outside, he calls one of the servants and asks what's going on. And the servant says, well, your brother's returned home and your father is throwing a celebration for him. And the older son is so angry, he won't even go into the house. So the father comes out to where the older son was, trying to get him to come in, and says, what's going on? And the older son says, this son of yours disrespects you and squanders his share of the estate on loose living and prostitutes. And when he comes home, you kill the fattened calf for this scoundrel. But here I am, having been obedient to you my whole life. You never even give me so much as a goat that I can celebrate with my friends. This son of yours has done all this. And the father responds, we had to celebrate because this brother of yours was lost and is found. He was dead, but he's alive to us again. We had to celebrate, and everything that I have is yours already. You can celebrate anytime you want. But now, come in, because we have to celebrate what has been restored to us. So, in the midst of that story, you can open your eyes and such again. Where did you find yourself in that story? Where did you place yourself? Who do you identify with?
The mom.
The mom?
Yeah, because I have two sons.
Well, I would assume there must have been a mom somewhere. You're absolutely right. And how did you envision that?
I had to listen to the older one gripe about us. Well, they're doing well now. They're 43 and 49. I haven't heard that for a long time.
Yeah. I love that the mom had to be there somewhere, but isn't specifically mentioned. That's great. Anybody else? Yeah.
The older brother, because I'm the oldest of the siblings, and when I was a kid, Cabbage Patch dolls were like super popular.
Yeah.
But expensive. So I had to save my $1 an hour babysitting money to buy my own. And then at Christmas time, my siblings got them for Christmas presents. And I was like, I had to pay my own money and you got that for free? Anyway, so yes, the older brother.
Indeed. Indeed.
And you're still
There was a
No.
time in my life I would have done exactly the same thing. But since I've had children, I think of my two children, and if one was lost, even if the life they led is not one I would approve of, which I don't approve of. I try not to judge anybody. Okay? I would be forgiving them forever, ever, ever. If they
Indeed.
came home, they were lost.
Sharon, did I see your hand up?
The father.
The father.
I'm trying to get somebody back into my family, and it's the Bible story hits all the right points, but it's simplistic and all of the
Yeah.
oops one.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, and that I do find that interesting in the parable. Is the parable really doesn't tell us whether the older son ever came in or not. Jesus ends the story at that point. I mean, that's one of the genius to many of Jesus' parables, is that he lets us finish the story. You know. And yeah, Lisa.
I just have such strong identification with all three characters.
Uh-huh.
Those two lost sons, and they're both lost.
Right.
The older one, he was invited to that party. Do you know that? They had a party without him. Would you be offended by that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many reasons he has to be offended. And he sees his brother's disrespect for the father, but he doesn't see his own.
Yes.
That he doesn't love his father and can't claim this person as his brother. So just profound disrespect there. And I just think the projection he does is pretty interesting. That other lost son, what interests me the most is that moment when he changes. I don't know where that comes from. Did God just break through and say, I want you to go home, you'll be accepted? It seems, the video you showed, it seemed that he was using reason. Like, they're fed better there than here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that matches up with the exact reading in the Bible. I remember the Bible, I've always been mystified what changed him. And allowed him just to leave that awful life and go home and ask for mercy, and then to find it given before he asked for it.
Yeah.
And that's that calls me to ask for moments. Just change me, God, open me up, and then let me come home to you. I just find that I can barely speak. That is so moving. Just that mercy before you ask for it.
Yeah.
That's our God.
And I know in my own experience, reason doesn't very often cause that kind of change. You know, I mean, in this political age, we can, you know, there's plenty of reason out there that doesn't make a dent in the strong beliefs that people are defending. So I don't know what the impetus of change there is. I know in my own experience, one of the biggest pieces to overcome is my own pride. You know, that
Admitting
I hate admitting that the choices I made were not the greatest. Now, I do have to confess this is my favorite parable because I'm a youngest child. And I think it's great news that youngest children, you know, will be forgiven anything. I don't know that that's what the meaning of the parable is, but that's what I take.
But we will be forgiven
Yeah.
anything. That's the amazing thing of this whole Christian story. We're
Yeah.
forgiven anything.
Yeah,
We just have to ask.
yeah.
I have a,
Well, Rachel had her hand up here.
The word that I was thinking of when you said that was that paradigm shift, that insight. It's
Yes,
beyond
yes.
reason, it's a realization.
Yeah.
That something happens that jars you enough, that you have that aha moment, and you say, something's got to change.
And
It's
the
that
Greek
hitting the
word
wall.
is metanoia, that
Mm-hmm.
complete,
Mm-hmm.
unexplainable change of heart.
Well, and I know you're jumping in here, Mary. I had
That's
just
okay.
one other thought on that. I mean, I remember helping with an aftercare group, and any of you that have spent any time around the recovery community know that that sobriety is not very often a one-off kind of experience. And one of the people in the group said, the last time I was here looking for sobriety. This time I'm looking for serenity. You know, which is a whole different kind of thing that who knows what that younger son thought they were looking for that they weren't finding at home in the first place. The other part of that, from what you were saying, Lisa, that really strikes me is that he was always a part of the family. The father never thought that he was beyond the bounds of of being loved. And that I think that's, for me, that's one of the struggles in our culture, is we don't really understand the word unconditional. You know, we treat so many things conditionally. And that it was, all right, your turn.
Oh, I had a brother who would have played the part of the younger son and went away for several weeks. I don't remember exactly how many, but he came home by ringing my parents' doorbell at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember Mom telling me, almost broke my neck trying to get down those steps fast enough because I knew who it was. Obviously, she had forgiven him a long time ago. And of course, the first thing she did in the morning was call the rest of us. We all lived many miles apart at that point, so we didn't get together and celebrate, but we celebrated all on our own. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. I just remember Mom was so forgiving and so excited when he came home that she almost fell down the steps getting there.
Well, I had a parishioner up in North Dakota whose son was a traveler, you know, and was out of touch for years and years and years. And I happened to be over at the church when she wandered over, and I still remember she said, well, how did you know I needed you? I had no idea. I was just there. But this was one of those days where her heart was just filled with this son who she hadn't heard from in years, didn't know if he was alive or dead, but that love was still there. And I think that's one of the things that informs this story for me. That and why I think, and I think you touched on it, Lisa, why I think this is one of those stories we have to keep telling, is that you know, there are so many messages in our culture right now of who's acceptable and who isn't, and even within Christianity. I knew one person who said to me, I am so tired of being a Christian, but. And what she meant by that is that, you know, when somebody would ask her, are you a Christian? She would say, yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind of Christian. I'm not the judgmental, angry, you know, whatever the preconceptions of Christianity are. And I think that's a big role that we at New Visions play, is to show people that there's a different way of being Christian. So this is, you know, being the one who gets to create worship. I understand that I'm dealing from a stacked deck. You know, I get to pick the stories that I think are foundational and fundamental for us, and so I picked the creation story. I picked the story where everybody gets fed, you know, and everybody's gift is valued, and I get to pick the story that everyone is welcomed home. So I understand that I have kind of predicated some of the answers here, but what I would like to hear from you all, there are two different questions. One of the questions I know I need to ask, because people want to tell me these, they want to tell each other these things, is what's your favorite story in the Bible? We'll get there.
Oh, that was fast.
Yep. But the second question is a little different. What do you think is the most important story that we need to hear, that you need to hear. Because sometimes they're the same. But sometimes those are kind of different things. I'm anticipating that when I ask about favorite passages in the Bible, 23rd Psalm is going to come up. It's a beautiful poem. And when you're hurting, there's a reason we still hear the 23rd Psalm at funerals, because those are potent words of love and grace. So, you jumped in. What's your favorite, Rachel?
I don't know if it's my favorite. It's the one that means the most to me. The woman at the well.
Woman at the well.
Sort of identify with her.
Woman at the well. How about some of the rest of you? We're doing favorite or most meaningful. Beth.
The resurrection.
The resurrection.
Otherwise there's no.
Yeah, that one's a little bit essential, isn't it? To who we are. Yeah, Larry.
The Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
And the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa.
I was looking again at the story about Philip and the eunuch that you preached on a few weeks ago. And I'm not. This is just my favorite story today.
I know how that goes.
Different one tomorrow, but when I looked at that this time, I was just struck by I am being taught in that story how to minister to people. And that is by being in the Word, so that I can teach them. The eunuch, I don't know what I'm reading, and he's just been to the temple. And
Right.
He doesn't know. And Philip knows the gospel. He knows it from contact with Jesus in various ways, and he just opens it up to him. And then Philip is so full of the Spirit that he's able to take the eunuch, this extreme insider and outsider, and give him water baptism and fire baptism. And I'm so desiring the next chapter, but it's over. I don't know what happens to Philip, to the eunuch, and Philip is so in the Spirit that God just takes him away to, run beside another chariot and illuminate. But that's, it was really interesting to read the story and say, oh, I'm being taught here. I need to be in the Word, and I need to be in the Spirit. And then I can be an effective witness, and I can really be that father welcoming home the son or whoever if I'm doing those two things.
Indeed. I like what you said about this is my favorite story this week.
Oh, no, today.
Oh, today. Yeah, indeed. But I completely understand that. And
yesterday.
This is where I get caught in doing a series like this is, I've been preaching some of these stories for better than 30 years now, which means some of these stories I've hit any number of times. And yet I am intrigued at how they are rarely the same story than the last time I visited it. That whatever is going on in my life or whatever is going on in the world is at a different place, and so the story comes to me differently. One of the things I really like about the parables is that Jesus told them in such a way that they're really just a window to look through, which means when you look through that window, you may see different things. Those who try to teach parables as this is the meaning of the parable kind of miss the point. That what it is Jesus is trying to offer us a perspective from which to look around and to see the world differently. That in this one, the parable that we're talking today, the other old school kind of way of teaching parables is to allegorize them, which means this thing means that, and this this parable gets allegorized that we are the younger son who, sins against the father so terribly. The father is God, who we sin against. And while there are those elements to that, I really think Jesus is telling us the parable, kind of as you said, Lisa, that we're being shown what it means to be the father. And we're being shown what it means to be the younger son. And we get to see what it's like to be the older son. That to say this means that kind of closes things down, where I really think Jesus was trying to open things up in the telling of this. And anyway, we were talking about what are our most meaningful, what are our favorite scriptures. Did anybody else have one? Yes.
The story of Mary Magdalene, when Jesus removed the 7 demons, and you can define the demons many different ways. And then after Jesus removes the demons, she becomes a disciple and eventually an apostle. So I just try to remember that even when I don't do what I'm supposed to do. God's okay with it. He's okay with me.
Indeed. Anybody else? So then, the second part of that question was, what are the stories do you think, well, I'm going to shift it a little bit for you. What are the stories do we need to be showing and telling to our neighbors? Like Philip opening up to the eunuch who Christ is and what that relationship all is. What do we need to be showing and telling to our neighbors about who we believe Jesus to be?
Well, the Good Samaritan's a good example. And it certainly is part of our mission.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I like that story, because you forget, if you haven't read it in a while, just the great extent to which we went. We think, well, I do stuff for people, I've done, but we hardly ever go to such great lengths to make sure that the person's taken care of, and I think the money to make absolutely certain that not just drop somebody off and pat ourselves on the back and move on. The story was much more detailed. It did much more than
I think the Pentecost is a pretty amazing one, because all those different languages and cultures and people from all over the world, they weren't speaking the same language, and yet the Spirit was binding them all together. Anyone can have that Spirit. And I don't know, that's just a beautiful one.
I really like that one too. This may come as a big shock to you all, but I don't respond well to the answer because. When that's all it is just because. Why do I have to do this? Because.
Can't be a mother without.
Well.
Because I said so.
I'm sure we tested my mother. But that I like the Pentecost story because it means God will speak in your language. God will speak in ways that make sense, that that you can hear. And
I'm thinking about something that shows that justice is a part of all of this. And the one that comes to mind is when he went into the temple and overturned the tables and says, "This isn't just.
Yeah.
You're selling things in the temple. This is not who you're supposed to be." And there may be a better one that says that, but we have to take care of each other.
And
they weren't.
it proved that Jesus was human too.
Yeah, he
He could get
He was
angry.
God and man.
Well, I like that also because then Jesus is not fluffy. We tend to paint Jesus as fluffy and cuddly and People don't get crucified for being fluffy and cuddly.
You guys with beards and stuff, are they fluffy and cuddly?
Yeah, some of us are.
Okay, just.
Some of us are. And that a part of this ongoing process, and we're just at the very beginning of it, is, and I don't know what kind of survey or what we're going to do, but to begin to identify and narrow down what some of these stories are so that we can begin the conversation with some of the artists. Now, I gotta tell you that my expectation is I want something more than just an illustration of a parable or a scene. I really want these artists to kind of live into it, to bring some of their own creativity and spirit to whatever it is we ask them. And then our next step in the midst of that is to look at those proposals and to see which ones are really enlivening for us. And it's okay if some of them are like, well, that's not quite where we were or where we are. And as you say about my favorite story today, and I preached on that a couple of weeks ago, is that, our stories change, which is a part of why I like the way this project has evolved, because these will not be permanent murals or something. But the church up in Boise that realized that one of the windows had Robert E. Lee as one of their spiritual ancestors. And at the time that church was built, that was a way of telling Southerners who were moving into that area, you're okay here, we'll accept you here. But now, 100 years later, or almost 100 years later, Robert E. Lee speaks a little different to us than in those days, and that they replaced Robert E. Lee with Leontine Kelly, the first African-American woman bishop in our denomination, so that they were able to change the stories that their windows, their pictures were telling, and that this may be the kind of conversation we revisit from time to time to make sure we're still telling the stories that we want to tell. And that it just, I don't know why this is, there is something about this that is really important to me, that when we get somebody wandering into our space, to have things in that space that tell them what's important to us. To be that, to find a more eloquent way of saying we are Christians, but that we are followers of Christ that are captured by the love and grace of Jesus. I've already preached once today. I don't know why I'm doing it.
Well, I see these discussions about looking at these paintings or illustrations or whatever we end up having. Through those discussions will help define our mission, help define, what can we do better, or what can we do new, or are we just okay the way we are?
Mm-hmm.
Or, I think I look forward to those discussions.
When you said, we are Christians, but, I thought, well, I don't like but there. We're Christians and.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That I know, particularly in this election year, I think it's more important than ever to be having that conversation about what it means to be Christian. And to do a little bit of in-house stuff. We have a very important general conference coming up this year, which is our international gathering as United Methodists. And of course, we are still coming to life again after a splintering. Worldwide, about 25%, 20 to 25% worldwide of United Methodist congregations have disaffiliated. I'm told, I don't know how to read this stuff. I'm not much of a politicking kind of guy, even in church politics. But I'm told that some of those who are allied with those who have disaffiliated have maintained their membership in our denomination so that they can attend General Conference.
And continue to stir the pot.
Yeah, you know.
Even if their church disaffiliated, they can do that?
Well, I don't know, you know, I mean.
Good question.
That's just a really good question. I don't have a good answer to. Because, I mean, technically, yes, they would need to seat their membership somewhere in a United Methodist Church. Some of it depends on their personal integrity. You know, that if they're already allied to a different denomination, why are they, you know, and I'm trying to be real, not politic is not the word I want, but, you know, I don't wanna judge somebody's intent.
Is of goodwill? Is that
Well,
the
that's
frame?
that goodwill thing that I've been
Yeah.
talking about lately
Yeah.
too, is I'm not entirely sure that they are there in goodwill. That's been a part of the conversation our life group has been having is, you know, we say, as I said at the sermon, all are welcome. What if a fundamentalist comes to our gathering? Are they welcome? And the best answer I have at this point, and this comes out of the encounter I had with the Corey Mila community here a number of months ago, is that their director said, we welcome everyone of goodwill who comes to us. And even if we fundamentally, pun intended, disagree on things, if they are here in goodwill, of course they're welcome. If they are here just to exacerbate and destroy, you know, when Jesus said that we are to turn the other cheek, Jesus did not say you have to submit yourself to abuse. That we can make everybody welcome, but if somebody is not here to seek the love of Jesus, but is here to sow the seeds of dissent and destruction, that does not, you know, we don't necessarily have to receive that with open arms. So I do think goodwill. And the other side of that is, as long as we are proceeding with goodwill, you know, I do think that is one of the biggest witnesses that we can give to the world, is proceeding in goodwill, even when parts of the world or parts of the church don't seem to be. You know, that's the Good Samaritan. Is nothing in the Good Samaritan says that he even liked the guy that was beaten up, but he still acted in his best interests. I was teaching on the Good Samaritan one time, and I said, if you were the person in the ditch, who would you be horrified to see coming down the road willing to help you? You know, that would, you know, and
Somebody with a tattoo of a swastika.
yeah, well,
You're right.
that or maybe somebody with orange hair. You know, but the point is, they're acting in goodwill.
That's right.
Wearing the capes.
So anyway,
It's a sign you have to be pretty careful about judging somebody who comes in the door.
yeah. You know, I would be so much better at this Christian stuff if Jesus just hadn't said that stuff about not judging.
I've heard of churches where people have to, if you're a guest, you have to ask permission to take communion.
Oh yeah, and there are churches that just will not
Will not.
offer communion to guests. You know, that's just a different way of doing things.
It's not, well, yeah, it's different.
When I did the 2-year Academy for Spiritual Formation, one of our faculty was teaching us about the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, which he clearly loves much of what they did. And somebody asked him, well, if you love the Orthodox Church so much, why are you still United Methodist? And he says, because I can't belong to any church that doesn't allow me to stand side by side with a woman and offer communion. You know.
We all have our individual things that drive us and concerns based on our experiences. We carry them in here.
Yeah.
And we might not agree with each other, but we have here is a common bond that we love each other and
Yeah.
we love Christ and we will work together.
And there will be glitches along the way.
And there will be glitches.
Oh, well, we're human, doggone it.
Maybe I've told you this before, but for years I was Quaker, and this is way before my time, like late 19th century. I think it was in Indiana.
You're not old enough to be late 19th century.
No, that was before her time.
Oh, before your time. I'm sorry, I skipped a beat here.
They were having their yearly meeting, I think it was in Indiana,
Oh, yeah.
and there was, traditionally the Quakers had always met without clergy, that everyone was equal. But there were people there were all these big revival meetings and things happening during that time, and there were people who wanted to be part of that and wanted to have a clergy to organize and preach, and they came to great disagreements, and the state militia had to come in and break it up.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh man, I'm glad we've never experienced that here.
And there was a bunch of Quakers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they did
The people of
divide.
peace.
And they did divide.
Yeah, the traditionalists became the conservative, and then the ones who wanted to go out and have tent meetings and stuff were the evangelical. And
Yeah.
they're still separate. But
I got to admit, evangelical Quaker kind of sounds like an oxymoron. But
some of us think so too.
all right. Well, I've already gone past time-wise where I wanted to this morning, and I've had more than my share of say. Is there anything yet that anybody wants to float out there?
It takes me a while to process things, I guess. 2 stories would be
Yep.
the story of the road to Emmaus and how Paul has changed so much. And then Zacchaeus.
And Zacchaeus.
I have to identify with him since he was short. But that's just kind of a story that in my growing up, there were just certain people you didn't associate with, and you definitely didn't go to their house.
Yeah.
So I guess for me and people like me, that's a good story.
Absolutely. Well, even though we have, and I always lose track, I think we have space for 8 panels in there. I think the challenge is going to be narrowing stuff down
Yeah.
to 8. And granted, maybe a panel can contain more than one, but I still think, making this a manageable project is going to be a challenge. I'm really excited about it. That I think bringing more color into our space is going to change the atmosphere in there, and knowing that I don't have any idea how these are being hung yet. I'm not anywhere near that part of the process. But knowing that we can bring them in, we can take them out, we can swap them in and out. The flexibility built into this is, I think is just invigorating.
Are you thinking 4 by 8 or
6 by 10.
6 by 10? Why couldn't you choose a size that I can go to Menards and buy?
Because I want our artists to go crazy.
Okay.
Speaking, and by the way, I am not planning on submitting a design for this. I want people in the community to do this. Partly because I don't want you all to feel obligated. It was like, oh, Doyle came up with that thing. But it is a very different experience to think about something 6 by 10 feet than to say we want something 16 by 20 inches. That it is just a different kind of creativity when you're looking at big space.
And 4 by 8's pretty quiet.
Well, I don't know we haven't even had that conversation about what the materials are going to be yet. I know that you can buy canvas that's 6 foot wide. Well, they come in rolls, so it's any number of
Oh.
that-
Put them on a frame.
So, I mean, that may be a part of the conversation we have with the artists too, is what materials do you see this being created with?
I don't have many artist friends, but I have contact with one who has a prison project and regularly has First Friday shows.
Cool.
And I have another contact who has a day, I don't know what he calls it now, but it's for people with disabilities.
Oh, yeah. Is that Dean Settles has his art place because he used to work with people with
I
that.
don't know. This is Micah Snyder.
Well, and I've had one very, very preliminary conversation with Peggy Gomez, who runs Gomez Art Supply and the Tugboat Gallery. She's in touch with a lot of
Yeah.
community artists. She also, her partner is Pepe down here,
Okay.
who is so involved with the neighborhood and
Yeah.
the community. So I mean,
And
Peggy's got good roots in the community too. So there will likely be all sorts of conversations about who wants to participate and how we get that word out and all of that. So
These are going in the sanctuary?
that's
Between-
what's in my head.
I'm just
Yes.
trying to picture, I need to go in there and look.
Yeah.
Between the windows?
Yeah. On those white spaces that are in there. And how many of them we're talking about, I don't know. This is just right on the very. I don't know how much iceberg is underneath us yet. We're just up on the tip. So So, but what this is we are asking ourselves, we're asking for the guidance to help us tell the stories of Jesus in ways that invite and heal and welcome each other and our neighbors. So thank you all. I know I will do this again. Next week we're going to have the forum on human trafficking, which I think is going to be a really important conversation. And then the following week I will do this again. And my original plan had been that I'll have 3 weeks, a series of 3 doing this. I don't know what that's going to be. Because I think we've got another forum the second Sunday in February, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
And then we're
That
Lent.
is absolutely.
Well, no, we got one more week in there before Lent, so I might be able to squeeze it
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
But then, yeah, Lent's coming just real darn
Yeah,
fast here.
Like on Valentine's Day.
Yes, indeed. Somebody suggested that on Ash Wednesday, instead of just making a cross, since it's Valentine's Day, we can make a heart.
I saw that on Facebook.
It was a Facebook meeting.
Yeah,
Little heart with a cross.
little heart, yeah. So, thank you all.